Welcome to Aspire, and I Have the Right To podcast, where we amplify voices, share stories, and drive change in the fight against sexual assault. We explore the critical issues surrounding student safety, institutional accountability, and survivor empowerment. In every episode, our goal is to provide insightful conversations with survivors, experts, educators, and advocates, giving you, our listener, valuable information, resources, and actionable steps to create safer environments and cultivate a culture of respect and consent. Welcome to the Aspire podcast. I'm Katie Shipp, Executive Director of I Have the Right To, and I'm really excited about today's conversation. Joining me as co-host for this episode is someone who brings so much thoughtfulness, passion, and heart to our work, Ray Epstein. Ray is our Youth Engagement and Programs Coordinator at I Have the Right To and an incredible advocate for change. Ray works closely with young people across the country, helping them build the skills and language to challenge harmful norms and create cultures rooted in consent, empathy, and accountability. I'm so glad to have you here with us today, Ray.
Thanks, Katie. I'm really excited to be part of the conversation and to welcome such an incredible guest with you.
Absolutely. Today, we're honored to be joined by Dr. Adrienne Baldwin-White. Dr. Baldwin-White received her PhD in social work from Arizona State University, and her work focuses on the prevention of gender-based violence.
Dr. Baldwin-White's research is deeply interdisciplinary and centers on developing effective prevention and intervention programs, especially those that integrate technology to improve accessibility and impact. Her work addresses social and cultural norms that increase the risk of gender-based violence, including how we understand sexual assault, consent, healthy relationships, and gender norms.
She's currently working on some truly innovative projects, including the development of a video game designed to serve as sexual assault prevention programming on college campuses, reimagining how prevention education can engage students in meaningful and accessible ways.
Dr. Baldwin-White also collaborates closely with law enforcement, helping to develop trauma-informed training for patrol officers responding to sexual assault. Her trauma-informed approach extends to medical professionals as well, and she's currently working on a smartphone app that serves as an educational resource for trauma-informed medical practices when supporting survivors of gender-based violence.
Central to all of her work is a strong commitment to addressing the unique experiences of people with marginalized identities and taking an anti-racist, anti-oppressive approach to research and prevention. Her work is grounded in the belief that inclusive, thoughtful prevention is essential to both stopping gender-based violence and improving support for survivors.
We're so grateful to have Dr. Adrienne Baldwin-White with us here today and can't wait to dive into this conversation.
Adrienne, welcome to Aspire. We're so glad to have you here.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
So I'd love for you to share with our listeners what inspired you to focus on gender-based violence and the path that led you here.
So I got my master's in social work from the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And while I was getting my MSW, I volunteered as a rape advocate at the Rape Crisis Center in Birmingham, Alabama. During that time, I really was impacted by the experiences of survivors. My very first client by myself after my training was a 16-year-old girl who was raped at school. And it was really impactful to see the impact that trauma had on her and to hear her talk about her experience, to see how brave she was to do a forensic exam after she had experienced so much. And I remember after I'd finished working with her and after she had left to go report to the police, I just cried in my car. I didn't have any other reaction. I didn't know it would be so powerful and it would be so overwhelming. And so after that experience, I realized that one of the things that I wanted to do was prevent that from happening to anyone else. I didn't want anyone else to have to experience that trauma. I didn't want anyone else to have to throw their clothes away because it's evidence, or have to worry about not taking a shower because of a forensic exam, or have to worry about getting therapy because of depression or anxiety or post-traumatic stress. And so I decided that preventing gender-based violence would be my approach and would be my focus.
That's so powerful. And I know so many people move into the prevention space after working directly in victim services because it can be something that really inspires wanting to stop future cases from happening. I know I've personally been in that position as well, and what made me move into the prevention space. And so I'd love for you to share what inspired you to create Once Upon a Party specifically, because I know that centers kind of your prevention work and your hope of preventing, especially on college campuses. So if you could talk about what potential gaps that you identified in sexual violence prevention education that made you think a video game would be a good way of filling in those gaps, that would be amazing.
Yeah, so one of the things that I have come to learn in talking to college students, and they've been very honest with me, which I really appreciate, is they talked a lot about the fact that when they take these programs at school, they just kind of click through. They'll put on Netflix and they'll put on YouTube and they'll listen to something and then just kind of click through, not really pay attention, not really read anything, not really listen to anything. And then when they get to the end, they notice that, they usually have to take a quiz or something like that to assess their knowledge and how much they learned from the program itself. And they would talk to me about the fact that the questions were so easy, it didn't even matter that they weren't paying attention. So I wanted to create something that would actually engage them and would be something that they would actually want to pay attention to. Video games are really powerful because they are really sticky. So the information that you get from video games can be really powerful and remain with you no matter what. This is why my husband can forget the trash, but actually remember a campaign in a video game 3 years ago. There's just something about playing a game that makes the information sticky. And so I felt like a video game would be a great mechanism to deliver sexual assault prevention programming. I also felt like I wanted it to use a mechanism that would also kind of force people to participate. It's important that you want to participate, but I know at a certain level there are students who aren't going to want to do it, who might feel it's irrelevant to their experience. And so I also needed to create something that would kind of force them to engage with the program itself. And having a video game, you have to participate in order to move the story forward. And so I really wanted to have that foundation so that people who implement these programs also know that the students will play through them and know that the students will actually learn from the experience of participating in the game. Once Upon a Party took about 4 years to create. It was a long process, but it's something that I am really, really proud of. It is text messaging based, so that's something that college students do all the time. They rather text than talk on the phone. And so I decided that that could be a really strong mechanism, a really strong design for something that's targeted towards college students. And what happens during the game is that you're presented with different scenarios. You're talking to friends who are experiencing different things at a party on campus, and you're receiving messages from them. And then you're provided with 2 options, and you choose one. And depending on which one you choose determines how the story progresses. The game itself, it not only teaches you skills, but it tries to change how you think about certain factors that influence risk of committing sexual assault. So things like patriarchal norms, so norms around sexism, norms around race, norms around sexual identity and sexual orientation, things like rape myth acceptance. So how likely are you to accept these false beliefs about sexual assault perpetrators and survivors? So the game also tries to change your attitudes and beliefs, not just give you skills, but realizing that one of the reasons why sexual assault hasn't been reduced on college campuses is because we're teaching these skills to students, but they're not using them. So one of the things that I've done in my research is try to figure out, okay, why aren't you using these skills, especially in bystander readiness and bystander education? Why aren't you using these skills that you've learned? And I think a lot of it is education about sex and about gender norms that they have learned over the last, 18 years of their lives. I can't get rid of those in one game. I wish I could, but I can't get rid of those in one game. But what I can do, hopefully, is get you to pause. Just pause for 1 second and think about the potential effects of your behavior and what could happen if you follow through with what you're doing. So hopefully that is the purpose of the game, is just to get students to pause while they are out with friends, while they're in relationships, while they're in intimate situations. Just take a breath and really think about what your partner wants.
So you mentioned that you worked with students really closely when you were designing this game that could resonate better with the people that are playing it. I'm curious how you got the students you were working with to open up to you about personal experiences and share those to become kind of the foundation of a game that would actually resonate with college students.
Thank you. So one of the things that is really core to who I am is I'm also a social worker. And I use a lot of skills that I developed while I was getting my master's in social work to work with these students in terms of building rapport and showing empathy and showing lack of judgment. I believe that lack of judgment is so important because I think a lot of students feel like if they're honest about what they think, what they feel, if they're honest about their behavior, that they're going to be judged. And I think they're also worried about potential consequences of their behavior. So it was really important that I let them know that everything is confidential, that what you tell me will not leave this space, that I am going to protect the information that you provide as much as I possibly can. And I believe that students really trusted me when I said that. They really trusted that I would keep their information private because I am a social worker. And I think with that label came an element of trust. I can trust this professor because they are a social worker. So I think that really helped me sort of create you don't have that much time. When you're doing research, you have a couple of minutes, maybe 2 or 3 minutes to build that rapport, to build that relationship enough to where they open up to you. And so I had to do it very quickly. And I learned as I went. It wasn't perfect the first few times that I did. It was primarily focus groups with the students. They weren't perfect the first few times that I did them. I really had to learn how to engage them in an honest way, but still maintain that dynamic where they understood that I was the researcher. I wasn't their friend, but I was open to hearing what they had to say. And that was another really important aspect of it. A lot of, at the end of our focus groups, I would do debriefing sessions with them. And a lot of them would say that they participated just because people don't typically listen to them. They just wanted to be heard. And they felt like this is an opportunity for them to be heard. And so I think just giving them an opportunity to talk about their lives, to talk about their experiences, really providing that outlet, I think invited them in and they really wanted to be a part of it.
We find that to be true so much with the work that we do as well. The more we invite them in, the more engaged they are and invest it in the programming. Have you been able to hear from them, their feedback on the video game and, whether or not they feel like it's shifting attitudes and behaviors around consent and sexual assault on campus?
I have. And so I've done some research to examine. So first of all, how accepting are they of this technology? Do they find it engaging? Do they find it immersive? Do they feel like it's something that they'd want to play again? Because once is not enough. So if a school required them to take it more than once, would they be willing to do that? I asked them about the design of the game, the graphic interface. I asked them about the text messages themselves. That was another way that I really interacted with students, is asking them about the text messages, making sure that they were accurate, make sure that they looked like how they communicate with their friends and with their peers. And so I really wanted to, first of all, figure out, does the game actually feel like something they would play? The next part was seeing if it actually changed their attitudes and beliefs. And I actually recently did a study and analyzed some data, and I found that it did. I found through my own research that it did change some of those attitudes and beliefs that increase the risk of sexual assault. It did reduce rape myth acceptance. It did decrease sexist attitudes and beliefs. It did decrease those negative and problematic gender norms. And so it did increase bystander readiness. So people's readiness to actually intervene to prevent a sexual assault from occurring. I found that it did that too. And so through my research, I've actually been able to see the positive impact that it has had on students. And through my interviews, I actually get that same sort of feedback just through interviews instead of through surveys, that the students had a really positive reaction to the game, that they felt their peers would be open to using it and would find it impactful too. That was really important to me, to understand if they believed their peers would also be willing to use it and be open to using it. And then I found out that, they also thought it was meaningful. They thought that it was very, not insightful, but they felt like it was relatable to use text messaging as the foundation of the game. And they immediately felt like it was realistic and based on their experiences. That was also really important to me, that the scenarios are based on the things that really happened to them. And so in those conversations with students, I asked them about their experiences with dating and relationships, and they felt like the information in the game and the scenarios that the students were in were realistic. And so I felt like I had gotten all the pieces together, and I was really successful in putting together this puzzle that could be completed. It's not a perfect game. I know that it is not going to, although I would wish that it would just get rid of all violence, all sexual violence on college campuses. I know that it's still going to happen. But I also know that, especially this comes from my social work values, that if it prevents one sexual assault, then I've done something. Then I've done something good and impactful.
100%. I'd love to hear from you, what you work in a college, you have this a video game for college students. What do you see as like the ideal college experience as far as like prevention education? Do you see this paired with other programming as they're coming in their first year? Do you think that this is something that they should repeat each year during college? Just how you envision it being integrated into the college experience and what you think it should be integrated with, and how you think colleges could use it in the best way.
I actually think that colleges and universities could use this on their own as their only sexual assault prevention programming, because it addresses so many different things. It teaches them different skills that they can use. It addresses their attitudes and beliefs that are harmful. And so I think that, my dream would be that this is the primary prevention programming for colleges and universities. A lot of colleges and universities during orientation would just give them information about what to do if you've experienced sexual assault, who you need to call, how do you get help. And I believe that that's really important. And I believe that orientation is a good space for that. But I don't think that's enough. Orientation is really overwhelming. A lot of the sexual assault prevention programming that they do is provided to them during orientation. And again, they are just overwhelmed by everything that they're learning about college, that I think that implementing it during freshman orientation is just not a good idea. But I believe maybe a week after orientation, students could be given the opportunity to participate in the game and play the game, and also given information about what to do if something were to happen. A lot of universities also do these, I don't know what to call them, but they're like introduction to college courses. So they're classes that students have to take. They learn more. It's not just about sexual assault, but they talk about substance use. They talk about alcohol consumption. They talk about maintaining healthy relationships and healthy friendships. They talk about what it's like to be in college. And I think this is a great place for that, in these particular courses, to have them take it. I do think that it's really important for colleges and universities to assess whether or not their program is being successful. And so I feel like there should be an evaluation component always. That's just the researcher nerd in me. There should always be an evaluation component to the game, just to make sure that it's actually working with students. And I would love for them to play the game at least 2 times during the first semester. Most students are at risk of committing sexual assault or experiencing sexual assault within those first 6 weeks of college. And so it's really important that we get that education in during that time. But like I said before, it has to be that sweet spot to where they're not still overwhelmed from all the information they're receiving, but it's not so late that it can't make an impact on actual behavior. So I would love to see them take it twice during that first semester. And then have it always available to them. I don't know how likely a college student would be willing to play this outside of a requirement for university, for attending a university, but having them always available to them so that they can use it and go back to it whenever they are feeling like they need it.
I'm curious because so many video games decide whether or not they should embed overt cues in terms of telling the player what they are trying to teach them through the game, or subtle cues. How did you choose through text messages when to be overt, when to be subtle, or which was kind of predominantly the theme in your game? And how did you find in your research process maybe whether or not one or the other was resonating more?
So throughout the research process, I realized that college students don't respond very well to, just being honest, being told what to do. They still have this mindset that they know what's best about their lives. And, in social work, we learned that they are the experts on their experiences. They are the experts on their lives. And so you have to trust that. You have to trust that they understand how they would react in a particular situation. And so a lot of times, previous sexual assault prevention program has been more overt in their approach, and it hasn't been very successful. Our rates of sexual assault remain high on college campuses. Students are still experiencing this at a high rate. And so the more overt approach isn't working. And I think it's because, again, we focus on providing skills, but we don't focus on changing those more covert attitudes and beliefs that actually affect whether or not someone is going to use that particular behavior. There are more powerful things in those real world situations that can sort of overtake a student's mindset. And so instead of doing the responsible thing, they do the thing that feels the best, or they do the thing that's going to get them the outcome that they want. And so I feel like the more subtle, indirect approach might be better for their students and would be better for students in helping them to actually learn, because a lot of situations that are relevant to sexual assault prevention, there's a lot of gray area. And that was really important to me too in developing the messaging, and that we like to believe it's black and white. You do this or you do this and everything will work out exactly how you want it to. But that's not what happens in real life. In real life, sometimes you have options and neither one of them is what you would want to do, but it's the only options that you have. And so because of this gray area, I wanted college students to sort of sit in that and be a little uncomfortable in the particular situations, and be a little uncomfortable because I'm asking you to make a really tough decision. I wanted college students to sit in that, and I felt like the more indirect, the more subtle cues would actually do that for them, would actually provide them with that uncomfortable feeling, that feeling of sitting in that gray area and having to make a really, really tough decision. I think that more overt messaging can be really beneficial, especially in situations where you don't want them to do something. Like, it is very clear that you should intervene. It is very clear what you should say to your friends who have experienced sexual assault and sexual violence. It is very clear how you support someone who is reaching out to police or wants to report to police what happened to them. Some situations are very clear, but in the moments where I'm asking students to stop and think about their actions, it's often not clear. And I feel like using those more subtle messaging could actually get across that gray area in those tough situations more than overt messaging. Also, a lot of students in my conversations with them talked about the fact that a lot of times they just kind of roll their eyes because some of that direct messaging is just obvious. Yes, your friend has experienced a sexual assault. You should be empathetic. But a lot of times, sexual assault prevention programming doesn't go any deeper than that. What does it mean to have empathy? What does it mean to act empathetic? How does that actually translate into behavior? And so I really felt like using more subtle messaging they would actually be more willing to absorb it because it's not so obvious and it's not so in their face. And also, sexual assault is a really sensitive topic. A lot of people might still be uncomfortable talking about it. We don't do a good job of educating students about sex in the United States. We don't do a good job of educating them about healthy relationships. And so a lot of college students might come to college still a little uncomfortable talking about it. I didn't want that potential discomfort to get in the way.
I love that you brought up students who don't necessarily respond to being told what to do and allowing them to chart their own course. I feel like we see that so much in the college space being a failure of students, even in lecture halls where there are hundreds of people and they're not involved in the conversation. And often people will complain the most about that class or retain the least because they're not having a conversation. And so I just love so much that you've centered the agency of students to navigate their own kind of adventure through this game and learn their own lessons that are still important and relevant to the issue.
I feel like that agency, I'm glad you brought that up. I feel like that agency is really important. I feel like a lot of students don't feel like they can actually act in those situations. It's not just that they don't know what to do, it's that they don't feel confident and they don't feel like they have the power to actually make an impact in that situation. They don't feel like, oh, if I intervene, nothing's going to happen. Oh, if I say something, nothing's going to happen anyway, so why say something? And so I feel like the game empowers students to actually act. Yes, you can. Yes, you can prevent a friend from being too aggressive with someone they're interested in romantically. You can prevent a friend from experiencing dating violence by helping them navigate a toxic relationship. You can support a survivor in a real way, in a way that makes an actual impact for that survivor and makes them feel like whatever that next step is, whether it's reporting it to police, whether it's reporting it to Title IX, whatever that next step is, help them feel empowered to take it. You can do that. And so I want to give students that agency and I want to give them that confidence to know that you probably already know what to do. You're just afraid to do it, or you don't feel confident enough to do it. So just reminding them this is the knowledge that you need. This is the attitudes and beliefs that we need to sort of have, not sort of have, these are the attitudes and beliefs we need to have in order to prevent sexual assault and sexual violence. And this is how we should act to support our peers, to support our friends. I learned that a lot, that for a lot of college students, they actually understand the complexity of consent. I know we do a lot of consent education, and I'm not saying we shouldn't do consent education, but in pairing that consent education with other education about more how to act in those particular situations and really addressing the causes of that particular behavior, understanding the why, not just the what. So they know what consent is, but why aren't they acting on that knowledge? Why are they still participating in sexual assault? Why are they still perpetrators? Why are they still participating in unwanted sex? Not just sexual assault, but unwanted sex. Why are they still pressuring their peers and participating in this behavior? Like, what values and norms do they have that need to be addressed? And I feel like only with doing that can you actually give them the agency, as you mentioned, to actually do the right thing in those situations.
It reminds me a lot about Lisa Damour's book. She talks about like hot and cold cognition and how it's important to practice in cold cognition settings, like when it's not actually happening, so that when you're in a hot cognition setting with like peer pressure all around you, that you actually know how to act. And it seems like that's exactly what the video game is getting them to do, like thinking through, okay, if this was actually happening, just beyond a definition of what consent is, if it was, or upstanding instead of bystanding, how you could actually act it out. And so I think it's so important. And I'm so glad that college students have this tool available to them. Is this tool something that their colleges have to, just for our listeners who want to check it out, is it something that their colleges have to provide to them? Is it something that they can find on your website? Like, how can they learn more about it if they want to bring it in to their colleges, or if there's educators or parents listening, what's the best way for them to learn more about how to access the video game?
Right. So as of right now, you have to have a .edu email address in order to access the game itself. However, you can go to my website. I created a company, Noble Tech, so it's just www.nobletech.org, and you can look at a demo of the game there. You can also reach out to me through the website, and I'm happy to do a demo in person. I'm happy to talk more about the game and answer any questions that I may have about the game. But the website is a really good place to start because it gives you some information about the game. It gives you information about its development. You can see a short demo of the game, and then it tells you how to reach out to me and to get in contact with me, so that you can get a more in-depth conversation, a more in-depth demo of what the game looks like.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I know that you're also working on developing trauma-informed practices with patrol officers and also medical professionals. Can you share a little bit more about that work as well?
Yeah, so I started working with medical professionals because I realized, just in my own personal experience as a woman, that a lot of the procedures that you go through in a medical office can be very triggering and can be very similar to what you experience in an actual sexual assault. And so I actually asked my own doctor, I asked her about, what do you do if someone discloses that they have experienced sexual assault? And she said, honestly, nothing. And I asked her why. And she said, because if someone says yes, I don't know what to do. So a lot of times they don't even ask if they've experienced trauma, if they've experienced sexual violence. They ask about domestic violence and intimate partner violence, which is interesting. I think that that directly impacts what they do in the medical exam, especially with if there's a partner there. So they ask, but I don't think they realize that it's the same with sexual assault and can actually be more powerful if they've experienced a sexual assault. And so I really wanted to change that. And I wanted to give medical professionals the information that they need in order to be better doctors, to be better physicians, nurses, physician's assistants, even medical assistants and administrators, when working with survivors of gender-based violence, because you can re-victimize them through the process of having a medical exam. And we don't want that to happen to survivors. There was a similar issue I encountered with police. You know, the detectives often get training in, trauma-informed police practices, but their patrol officers don't. And patrol officers are first responders. When you report a sexual assault on a college campus, a patrol officer is going to respond first. And they don't get that training. Mostly it's logistics I learned in my conversations with police officers and the captain of the University of Georgia Police Department, that a lot of it is just logistics. Like it's, patrol officers work different schedules. They are working overnight. It is very difficult to get all of them in one room to do a particular training. And so I wanted to create something online, first of all, so that it wouldn't matter what shift they were actually working. And I also wanted to create something that helped them understand the value of being trauma-informed, because when you interact with a survivor, that first interaction could determine whether or not they continue in the criminal justice process, whether or not they do an official report to the police, whether or not they do an official investigation. All of that could be determined by that first interaction. So I wanted to create something that would educate them on trauma-informed policing, what it is, and why it's important for them to do it too, why it's important for them to have that trauma-informed education.
Since you mentioned working with patrol officers, I'm curious because your work centers so much on anti-oppressive and anti-racist approaches. When you are working with law enforcement, and also more broadly when you're working with students, when you're doing your work and designing programming, how do you center those two components in that work? And also, if you could give some advice to some of our listeners who probably also work in prevention, how they can better center those approaches too in their work.
So one of the things that I had to learn just through working with college students and listening to them and listening to their experiences is that their race and their sexual orientation and their gender identities matter. It affects their experiences, not just after the violence occurs, because it definitely affects how they interact with systems like the police, systems like medicine. But it also affects how they experience relationships that could make them more vulnerable to sexual assault and sexual violence. I've had students who identify as queer as part of the LGBTQ plus community. I've had them talk about the fact that, a lot of sexual harassment especially is a result of just them violating those gender norms that our society has. And it's almost like punishment for breaking those traditions, for violating those norms, almost like a hate crime. And I've had students talk about that. I've had students talk about racial factors, like if they're in a situation, if they are a person of color and they are with a white person, how they might feel disempowered to actually say no because that person is white, because that person has power, because that person has power within those systems that they would report to. Would they even be believed next to a white person if they're a person of color? Would they even be believed if they are queer next to a straight person they're accusing of sexual harassment or sexual assault? So it's really important to take into consideration people's identities when creating prevention programming. And especially when you're working with these systems that are inherently biased, and they just are. There are inherent biases and implicit biases in these systems, and we need to address those, and we need to be more, you talked about the subtle messaging, but I think when it comes to that bias, we actually have to be more overt in that. And so I try to incorporate those messages around being inclusive, around equity in the programming that I do. It's not easy because you want students to hear you. You don't want them to ignore the messaging. You don't want them to feel like what you're telling them is irrelevant to their experiences. But I think in this case, in the case of anti-racism and anti-oppression, you have to be overt. You have to confront those biases. You have to name them. And you have to provide students with a way to address their own biases. All students, even students who do the work to be anti-racist, anti-oppressive, still have those moments where they aren't, right? And so we have to really do the work to help them confront their own biases and confront their own issues around race and gender identity and sexual orientation. And we also have to work with these systems to be just as honest about their own bias and about their own implicit bias. And I will say, it is much more difficult working with medical professionals and police officers in terms of confronting those biases than it is working with students. But it has to be done. And that's why creating those relationships we talked about with students, it's also important to create those relationships with medical professionals and police officers, You don't want to come in wagging your finger at them saying, you're doing all of these things wrong. Why are you doing things this way? You should be doing them this other way. They're not going to listen. But for me, I basically created like a community advisory board and with police officers and with medical professionals. And I centered them and I centered their experiences and I centered what it's like to work with them in real life. And I made sure that I really involved them in the process. Involving them in the process, asking them about their real life experiences, centering their experiences, and not coming in and being judgmental really helped me help them confront those implicit biases around race, gender, and gender identity that can affect how they interact with survivors.
I love your balance that you found of making it both accessible for everyone who is in a workspace that can't necessarily show up to something in person, but of also centering the experiences of everybody at the same table and kind of bringing everyone into the same conversation. It reminds me a lot of working with fraternities on campus, especially, and having to call them in and not call them out so that they can feel empowered to be a part of the solution and the change. And it seems like you're really doing similar work with law enforcement professionals and medical professionals. And that's incredible.
Thank you. I want them to actually hear me and listen to what I have to say. And, there are definitely social workers who disagree with my approach. I tend to be very forgiving of these systems, not letting them get away with their behavior, but I tend to give them the benefit of the doubt that if they know better, they will do better. And so I tend to remember that they are human beings. I tend to remember that all human beings make mistakes, but all human beings are capable of doing better. And so I go into these situations with medical professionals, with police officers, and with college students, acknowledging that you're a human being, you've had all of these experiences, but this is what someone else's experience is like. This is how they see you as a doctor. This is how they see you as a detective. This is how they see you as a patrol officer. And that's really important. I understand that you have an identity as a part of these communities, but it's important for you to recognize how people outside these communities see you. And so I try to come at this process for an empathetic perspective because I know that empathy is more likely to engage them and encourage them to actually participate in the process.
I love that you come at this with that empathetic lens. And I think, you're showing and you're demonstrating how they can do it too, and how they can address communities with empathy too, and how they can engage in that same perspective as you do. And I think I speak for everybody who's listening, most likely, to say that your empathy is inspiring and that I'm sure that it is impacting a lot of change every day in so many communities. And for so many people who find their way to I Have the Right To and our community, our name means a lot more than just the organization itself, than just consent education. It becomes a call to a community and a promise to ourselves, a commitment to advocacy, and a belief in safer future for the next generation. And for me, as a survivor, it gave me hope. And we usually invite our guests to complete this sentence toward the end of our podcast. I have the right to blank. So I'm curious if you'd be able to share with our listeners what that statement would be for you.
I have the right to live bravely. For me, it's all about being yourself and having the courage to be yourself. And that requires bravery. And so for me, I think that's the core of what I try to communicate to students is that you have the right to be yourself wherever you are. And so I want students to live that type of life where they feel like they can be brave or they feel like they have the courage to actually be themselves.
That's beautiful. I got goosebumps when you said that. I think that's what we hope for ourselves and for the people around us. And that was just such a beautiful way of putting it. Thank you so much, Adrienne. Thank you for joining us today. This conversation has been incredibly thoughtful and inspiring, and we're so grateful for the work you're doing to prevent gender-based violence and to reimagine what effective, inclusive prevention can look like.
Thank you. We are so appreciative of your time and your leadership in this space. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Aspire. If today's conversation resonated with you, we encourage you to learn more about Adrienne's work and to continue engaging in prevention efforts in your own communities. Be sure to follow Aspire wherever you listen to your podcast and check out I Have the Right To for resources, programs, and ways to get involved.
And remember, if you are inspired by Aspire episodes, remember you can bring these conversations to your own communities. I Have the Right To has workshops and keynotes specifically designed for preschool through 12th grade, college and university students, as well as their parents and educators. If you want to learn more, you can email us at takeaction@ihavetherightto.org. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time on Aspire. Thank you so much for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcast on all platforms. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends about Aspire. Follow us on social media at I Have the Right To. Learn more about workshops and programming available for students, educators, parents, and community members at ihavetherightto.org.